All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're digging into what might be one of the most controversial moments in the entire history of psychology. We're going to be looking at Jeffrey Masson's book, The Assault on Truth, and really trying to understand a single, huge decision by Sigmund Freud. A decision that you could argue completely changed the way we've thought about trauma and memory for, well, the last century. And this whole story is often described as a psychological detective thriller. And honestly, that's a perfect way to put it. We're talking sealed archives, letters that were hidden away, a truly brilliant discovery, and then, out of nowhere, this shocking reversal. So what we're going to do is follow the breadcrumbs, just like detectives, and try to figure out what was really going on here. And that brings us to the big question, the one that's at the heart of this whole thing. Why? Why would Sigmund Freud, after making this incredibly brave, brilliant discovery, just abandon it? It makes no sense on the surface. That's the puzzle we're here to solve today. Okay, so first things first, to really get why the reversal was such a big deal, you have to understand just how massive the original discovery was. We're going back to the 1890s, and Freud comes out with a theory that was, well, it was completely earth-shattering at the time. He called it the seduction theory. Now, you got to remember, before Freud, when women came forward with stories of childhood abuse, they were just dismissed. They were labeled hysterical, which was basically a catch-all diagnosis that meant their pain wasn't real. It was all just a product of, a woman's broken mind. But Freud, he was the first to stand up and say, wait a minute. No, I believe them. They are telling the truth. Something awful really happened to them. He was choosing to believe in their reality over some kind of fantasy. And believe me, he knew he was stirring the pot. He even said that by presenting this theory, he would become one of those who had disturbed the sleep of the world. And when he finally presented it to his colleagues in Vienna back in 1896, he was met with what he later called an icy reception. Just dead silence. They told him not to publish it, but he did it anyway. I mean, think about that. It was an incredibly brave move, a huge professional risk. He was standing up for the literal truth of what his patients were telling him. All right, so now let's fast forward a bit and get back to the detective work. Decades later, a researcher named Jeffrey Masson finally gets his hands on Freud's sealed archives. And what he finds suggests that the official story about why Freud dropped his theory, well, it's a lot more complicated than we've been led to believe. And one of the biggest clues was sitting right there in plain sight, on Freud's own bookshelf. It turns out he owned several major books by the top French forensic experts of his day, and all of them wrote in detail about the shocking reality of child sexual abuse. So we're not talking about some obscure little pamphlets here. These were the definitive scientific books on the topic. The key takeaway here is that Freud had access to real, hard data. Forensic evidence that showed just how common this kind of abuse actually was. And that makes his later claim, the one where he said he was shocked by how widespread abuse would have to be for his theory to be true, it starts to seem a lot less believable, right? And just what kind of data are we talking about? Get this. In just one of those books, the one by the expert Ambroise Tardieu, he details 616 cases of sexual assault that he personally examined. And of those, 339 were of rape or attempted rape on children under the age of 11. 339. Freud had this book. He'd read this. He knew these numbers. Okay, now let's zoom in on a specific case, because this one might have actually given Freud the blueprint for his big reversal. This is the truly tragic and, frankly, bizarre story of one of his patients, a woman named Emma Eckstein. So Freud's good friend, Wilhelm Fliess, had this kind of out-there theory connecting the nose to sexuality. And at Freud's urging, he performed surgery on Emma Eckstein. What happened next was an absolute catastrophe. She almost bled to death. And the reason why is just horrifying. Fliess had accidentally left half a meter of surgical gauze packed inside her head. And it just sat there festering for weeks. So here's Freud's immediate reaction in a letter he wrote to his friend. It's this moment of absolute shocking clarity. He completely acknowledges the physical reality of the situation. He says her suffering wasn't in her head, it was caused by a real, tangible, awful medical mistake. He even says she was not at all abnormal. The cause was real, end of story. Or so you'd think. But then something changes. As Emma's symptoms kept going, Freud's explanation for them takes this massive, dramatic turn. So was this some genuine new psychological insight? Or was it something a little more convenient for both him and his friend? And this is the big switch. In order to protect Fliess from the fallout of his obvious malpractice, Freud completely reframes Emma's life-threatening bleeding. He now says it's a psychological trick, a hysterical symptom that she's creating out of an unconscious desire to get Freud's attention. Do you see what happened here? This became the template. A real physical trauma gets explained away, turned into something psychological. It showed just how powerful and dangerous a tool this could be for completely reshaping reality. So you see, the Emma Eckstein incident wasn't just some isolated tragedy. It seems like it gave Freud the exact mental model he needed for his greatest theoretical U-turn, the moment he officially threw out the seduction theory for good. In a really famous letter to his friend Wilhelm Fliess in 1897, Freud lays out his new reasons. He says, well, for one, the therapy wasn't a complete success. He also says it's just too improbable that so many fathers could be abusers, never mind the data he had sitting on his bookshelf. But then he gets to the biggest one, the real game changer. He introduces this new idea that in the unconscious mind there's, and I quote, no indication of reality. He was now saying that truth and fiction, what really happened versus what we imagine, they're basically indistinguishable. And the fallout from this decision was immense. I mean, this was a fundamental pivot for the entire field of psychotherapy. Suddenly, the Oedipus complex, a story all about internal desire, fantasy, and conflict, comes in and replaces the seduction theory. And for generations to come, therapy would teach people to look inward for the source of their pain, while the reality of what might have actually been done to them was often downplayed or even ignored altogether. But the story doesn't quite end there. Because the ghost of the seduction theory, that original idea, it was going to make a comeback decades later. And it would do so through one of Freud's closest, most brilliant followers, a man named Sandor Ferenczi. Okay, check this out. It's like history repeating itself, but with a tragic twist. 36 years after Freud stood alone, Ferenczi presents his own paper called Confusion of Tongues. He'd been working with extremely traumatized patients, and he came to believe that the real damage wasn't just the abuse itself, but the denial of that abuse by the adults in a child's life. He was basically saying, hey, Freud, you had it right the first time. And guess what? He was met with the exact same hostility. Only this time, the person leading the charge against him was Freud himself. The backlash was just swift and brutal. Ferenczi wasn't just told he was wrong, he was pathologized. His own colleagues, with Freud's encouragement, started whispering that he was mentally unstable. His groundbreaking work was dismissed as a step backward. And after he died, this final, incredibly important paper was basically buried for decades. The psychoanalytic establishment actively tried to erase his final truth. And the personal toll on him was absolutely devastating. In his private diary, Ferenczi makes a direct connection between the start of his fatal illness, pernicious anemia, and the moment he realized that Freud, his mentor, wasn't going to protect him. In fact, he was going to lead the very people trying to destroy him for speaking out. He died less than a year after writing that. So that leaves us with this huge provocative question at the end of it all. Was Freud's reversal just a simple scientific correction or refinement of a theory? Or was it, as Jeffrey Masson argues, a monumental failure of courage? A single choice that steered the course of psychotherapy for 100 years. A choice that led us to explore the incredible, fascinating world of our internal fantasies, but maybe, just maybe, at the profound cost of not always acknowledging the devastating impact of external reality.